up it and see. And perfect. Hey, welcome to Legacy and Leaders. Augustus C. Foster, and today, no introduction. One of the more decorated collegiate or folk style, if you will, athletes that has ever walked through not just the doors of his institution, but the bio, the Wikipedia, and records and trophies were all there, man. The brother was recently announced as the head coach to the University of Northern Colorado. So he is now about to build and grow that program up there in Greeley. And I'm excited that he took some time out of his busy getting ready to recruit, getting ready to get established, getting that office set up season. So, brother Teyon Ware, coach, thank you for the time, man. How you doing this morning? Coach, can you hear
No,
me?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Yes, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Good man, good man. So, for anybody who's watching, tell the man about Oklahoma life, being another Oklahoma native from the state. I believe y'all state motto. I was talking with two other Oklahoma locals, and the state motto is, oh man, I can't think of, but it's extremely encouraging. Where it's like something like from the soil or the grow or the push, and I was like, that is an extremely motivating state motto that I think like a lot of you have adapted like personally and attached the label to yourself to be able to push through and persevere and just outshine when others don't expect you to do so. So, man, just if you can tell people a little bit about yourself and being from Oklahoma, having roots in Oklahoma, staying to the soil and dominating and wrestling in Oklahoma. If you do that, if you can.
Yeah, so obviously born and raised in Oklahoma, Oklahoma City. Obviously I have a big family. I have, numerous brothers and sisters and everything. And so, but also I have a lot of family that took me in. And so,
Mm,
I have quite a few ladies I call moms and everything. And my coaches were my mentors. They were my father figures. And so, um, when people hear about my lifestyle, you will say it wasn't the norm. It wasn't the norm. And one thing I had to learn very early as a young man is, get out of your comfort zone. The learn how to be out of my comfort zone. And at the end of the day, we as humans, why do we work? We work to get comfortable. That's what we do at the end
yeah.
of the day. That's why we work is to live a comfortable life. And so,
Mm,
but what we fail to understand, when we get comfortable, we stop growing. And
mm,
that's one thing I'm learning, you know, as a person, as well, is when I get comfortable, I quit moving. I quit moving, and so being born and raised in Oklahoma, that's all I got to know. That's all I ever knew,
mm,
and I've noticed when God uprooted me, in different areas, different homes, I saw success. I saw a lot of success, even though my heart was wanting to be at home with family. I knew it couldn't be, and so and and to be honest with you, I saw that from the age of 10 to the age of 18, and saw a lot of success. And I tell people this: my problem became for when I was 19. To I graduated, and that was being comfortable, and that was college. And when you get to college, yeah, you want to be an adult, but you're not. You ain't really understanding what an adult is. People, so many young men and women, quick to say they grown, and they don't understand, the attributes of being grown. Being grown means, hey, you know, you're paying for your own bills. You're
right,
making your
right,
own,
right, right.
and you can't say you grown and you mom and daddy, you on mom and daddy's insurance and everything, and mom and daddy's house and everything like that. So we're quick to take that title, but we're not really, but attributes aren't there. And that's what I started to do, because I was starting to get comfortable. I was starting to be comfortable,
Mm,
and and God has shown me, hey, for to use you, you got to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
mm.
You
And the
know.
best is there's always growth in that discomfort.
Right.
Like there's always growth and the discomfort of, what do I? Because it places you in a position to where when things are difficult, when it does hit the fan,
Mm-hmm.
how do you adapt? How do you
Mm-hmm.
accomplish anything? How do you
Right.
become successful? It's and like you said, I think my father who raised me, my pops, my stepdad,
Mm-hmm.
he taught me at 17 the difference between being an adult and being grown. He said, when you turn 18, you're an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can vote, you go get a job, you go work and do these other things. He said, but that's an adult. He said, grown is when you are out, you are providing for yourself, you offer my insurance, that
Right.
light bill, that cable bill coming to your name. He said, because now that weight is on you.
Right.
That weight isn't on me. He said, so I love you, son. When you turn 18, you're an adult. But by no means are you grown. You just an adult. So I said, yeah, man, that pressure, being out young, I said, okay, this is real life, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to make some changes. And like you said, it's real easy to get comfortable in mom and dad's house, and then that 18 hit, you like, ooh, man, they want the whole light, but they want the whole light bill on the
Oh
fourth.
yeah. Oh
They
yeah.
they
Oh
want
yeah.
they want the whole water bill
Oh
on the
yeah.
seventh. Like Jesus,
Oh
man,
yeah.
this
'Cause you ain't taking, you believe me, you lighten up your whole room and everything like that. You lighten up your whole game. You ain't lighten up part of it. You
no
on
man,
you running a lot of water in that shower and washer and all that. You ain't just taking a cup,
yeah,
so
no,
I need that
right.
full bill.
Need all that. So yeah, man. I mean, having that upbringing and realizing, like you said, we got 18, 19. So clearly all of the mentors you had and all of those other moms and people engaged you, them loving on you and supporting and pouring into you. Which of them presented to you the idea, like of all of this support system around you? Who came to you and said, you know what, Tim, I think wrestling, like, have you thought about wrestling? Have you thought about sports or athletics alone? Who was the person who kind of put that bug into your ear and planted the seed of wrestling?
It wasn't much as a seed. It was just threw me in. And that was my grandma. And so I was raised by my grandmother. My grandma, you know, as you know, especially in the community, black community, a lot of grandmas have to be the moms. And so,
Yeah.
and grandma was mama. That's what she
Mm.
was. And rest in peace to her. But I was a rowdy kid. I was very athletic. I wasn't scared of much. I'll be flipping off houses. I wasn't scared of nothing. There was no conscience in me. And I had a couple younger siblings up under me, and we wrestling around 24/7, breaking things. And grandma didn't have much money. My grandma was all, we living off the government. And so grandma, she threw it in, by word of mouth. We had a coach that says, hey, put him in wrestling. I'll come pick him up. And I got about six other guys here, and I'll pick him up every night and bring him to the Eastside Y. And that's exactly what he did. He brought me to the Eastside Y, and I adapted quickly to the sport. Adapted quickly to the sport. If you look at me, if you watch film of me as a kid, I was built, I was strong, I was short, I was developed, and at the end, yeah, a lot of it was genetics, and so I had that confidence of stronger than this kid. Let me go pound this
Right.
kid, and we couldn't afford the wrestling shoes. My wrestlers saw some little league videos of me, and they like, are those Air Force Ones? I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
boy,
Listen.
yeah, we couldn't afford no wrestling shoes.
And are you in on the mat, are those out from California? I remember seeing the kid in the tournament, like, this brother got on Nike Cortez.
Oh,
Like,
oh
oh
yeah,
man, like
that's just what
he
it is. You got to
I'm
have
like, I
something to
don't
cover your feet.
man, that's it.
And so the deal you just wrestle. You had the simple freestyle, old school freestyle, red and blue singlet in one. Short. That's just what it was. It was cheap, and so, but that's where I met my first true mentor, with Willie Batson, who worked for the government at the time, but he was also our little league coach of the Eastside Warriors, and Coach Willie had a family of his own. He had a son, he had a wife, and that was the first time I actually got to see, a black family, black marriage. I got to
Mm.
see that. And Coach Batson, he was a man that wore a suit during the day and he wore sweats in the evening. That's just what it was. And the deal is he was the first man to actually give me goals. He gave me goals. He gave me that fear of as a father where I didn't want to disappoint him, but he gave me goals every weekend. At tournaments, and even when I fell short of those goals, you know, he still showed love. And he did that to numerous guys. You're thinking we had 30 to 50 kids on our wrestling team. So Coach Batson and his crew was like, it was father figures for most. And so the deal is he was sharpening us as young men, as young black men of getting us ready for the world. We didn't see that as kids. We just saw him at times as a scary man. If we didn't do what we was told, we were gonna get in some trouble. But I remember the first time, I met a goal of mine is when I got straight A's. This was in first grade. I got straight A's. And, I was excited. I brought it to him. He said, I'm proud of you. And I remember a couple of days later, he's driving me home and he gives me this $5 bill. He said, these are for your grades. Hey, you have five, courses. You got, 5 A's, here's $5. Now, as a 6-year-old, $5
Mhm.
back in the
Oh, you
day.
balling? Oh, you
Oh
balling?
yeah, $5
There you
back in the
go.
day. That was back when you had penny
Oh,
candy
yeah,
and 25 chips. Little
yeah,
Debbie was
yeah,
25 cents. I mean
yeah.
that can go for the month.
Early '90s. I was there. It was amazing.
Yeah,
What a time.
yeah, what it was. And knee
Yeah,
high and
what a
Shasta
time.
and all that. Yeah, knee high and Shasta pop and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So at the end of the day, that lasted me a month. And the deal is they gave me goals of I want to do this often. I got to do this often. I got to get these grades often, because I want that money. And I remember Coach Bass like, hey man, you breaking me. You breaking me, man. Because now the word's getting around to the team. The
Yeah.
team is like, boy, y'all breaking me. Yeah, yeah, I'm grateful y'all making these straight A's, but we were so
Yeah.
anxious to give Coach Bass and our report cards straight A's, and
Right.
but little did he know that's what motivated us.
Mm,
And what he had to learn to teach us now was, hey, you don't need to do things just to get rewarded. You do it because it is the right thing to do. You know,
right.
now at the time as an 8, 9 year old, you ain't trying to hear that.
No,
You
no.
like,
I'm
nah, I
trying to.
want my money. I want my
Trying.
money.
I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get to the bag. Like I
Yeah, I'm
don't.
trying to
I don't.
get to
I
this
don't.
money.
Yeah. I don't want to hear about all of that duty and service, coach. Like
Yeah.
I'm about this
Yeah, when I
paper.
get grown. Yeah, when I
Yeah.
get up there, when I get older. And so, but the deal is he gave those goals to 30 to 50 young black kids and he accepted all. He accepted all. And that's what stuck in me. And
So
is to help, to help. Do whatever I do, to help. And that's been in my motto, since the beginning.
awesome, man. So you Eastside Warriors and Coach Batson and you run to the leagues and from elementary, junior high, high school, and now you established yourself and made a name for yourself. What made you say, like, because at this point you're 18, about to be 19, what put in you the decision to go, I think I want to stay home even to wrestle? Because I mean, there's other programs, there's Iowa, well shoot, there's all of the Big 12.
Right.
You have I'm from out west. Like I said, I've had partners who wrestled at Cal State Bakersfield,
Mm-hmm.
which back in the day, for people who will watch this who are of a certain age, you can remember Tito Ortiz, the MMA
Yeah.
fighter,
Yeah.
went to Cal State Bakersfield. You have a couple of other
Neil.
schools out
That's
here
Neil.
out
Yeah.
west.
Yeah.
Yeah, your Oregon State, Wazoo, and of course, Northern Colorado, even schools on the club level. And I'll even say, as somebody else from California, the hundreds of NAIA programs that have wrestling. And what made you say, out of all of these opportunities, like what was in front of you and what boiled it down to, man, I'm boomer sooner. Let's do this.
You know, um, obviously being the number one recruit of 2002 out of that class, like I said before, I never knew really anything outside of Oklahoma. And as I'm, my coach, who I was staying with, who are my parents, you know, they wanted me actually to go to Air Force because they were thinking further down the road,
Long
and
time.
yeah, they were thinking long term. But
Mm.
obviously September 11th just happened,
Yep.
and let's just say Boys in the Hood had a little effect on me as a young kid, and I was like, man, no, like. But at the end of the day, now that I'm wiser and grown, I'm like, that is, those are things I would encourage kids to do, because you can't fight against something like that, Army, Navy, or Air Force, because you're thinking long term. You want what's best for that young
Right.
man. And so at that time, I wasn't hearing that. But, when it came down to a school, obviously you had Nebraska, you had OSU, and you had Oklahoma. You know, Obviously Nebraska at that time had my favorite coach, which was Mark Manning. Mark
Yeah.
Manning, I knew him because Mark Manning coached at OU, and I was part of the club at OU as a kid, Team Oklahoma,
Mm.
and so we got to see those guys. And then, but then OSU had the number one coach, or the number one team. They were
Mm.
the Penn State before the Penn State, and so they had the history. But then OU had a mixture of them both. OU was number three at the time, and Coach Spates, who I've gotten to know known before that because that's who Mark Manning worked under, and like Coach Spates a lot. But I tell people this: what influenced my decision big time was not only Coach John Smith. He chose an Oklahoma kid over the top 25 pounder at that time, Sam Hazewinkle. And if you know Sam grew up with us in Oklahoma. Then he moved to Florida uh, and finished out his sophomore, junior, senior year. And he was the top wrestler at his weight, so he wanted to come back to Oklahoma, whether it be Oklahoma or Oklahoma State. Well, obviously, he said, hey, let's see what Okie State's going to do. Well, Okie State
Mm.
shortened him. Coach John Smith shortened him. And so he said, well, I'm going to OU. What are you thinking? I said, let's go down here and do our own thing, because I understand. I tell people don't get this, you know, if Coach Smith would have, chose Sam, you're talking about you having a possible national champion at 25. You had already a champion at 33. You had me at 41. That was a champion. Zach Esposito, 49. Uh, Johnny Hendricks, 57 and 65. Tyrone Lewis, NCAA finals 65, Chris Pendleton, two-time national champion, 74. You had Jake Roshaw, you had Muhammad Lawal, and you had Steve Mako. We probably would have had the greatest team ever assembled.
That would have been the most probably, and even for anybody who even because like I watched collegiate and high school wrestling and flow
Mhm,
wrestling. I got the script, so I know it. But even for people who don't even recognize freestyle or collegiate wrestling, they'll hear Hendrix
mhm,
and for translation King Mo, and and go, wait a minute, like all of these dudes were on that. Yeah, that would have been like the recruiting and team of probably of the century. That's
mhm.
yeah, that would have been insane.
Yeah,
That would
we
have
would
been
have been
insane.
dominant. And I'll just say they wouldn't,
Yeah,
they would have been throwing us up there with the Warriors and the Bulls and all that of some of the most dominant teams ever to be addressed in history.
man.
And all that fell short. That fell short because of 30% of a scholarship. And so
Mm.
that's the difference. Between 70 and 100. 30%. And so did they need us? No, because OSU still went on to win five national titles after that. They were still
Right.
good. And so at the end of the day, I ended up choosing OU. I told myself if I was to get hurt and can't wrestle ever, I'm gonna be more miserable being out in Nebraska 8 hours away, knowing I don't know much about the environment. I would have been even more sad
Mm.
knowing I'm in OSU territory. That's all wrestling, and I got to be on the sideline cheerleading,
Man.
And then I said, OU, I can at least, you know, finish up my degree, still go about my way, and know the environment and everything. And so that's what it came down to, and we took it from there.
Oh, so how was life in Norman? Like I've
No,
I've had yeah, I've had associates attend other schools, but I've never, like I've even driven through like Norman. Like I've been down to Thackerville to support
oh yeah,
partners and friends when they were, fighting on like Bellator
yeah,
cards and
yeah,
and
yeah.
I got free tickets. So I'm like, Oklahoma is, it has some culture. It is a
Hmm.
beautiful state. But driving through Norman, I said, man, if you are here, man, you got it. You gotta love it. I said Norman is very, yeah. I was like, no, I said Norman. I said Norman is very. I said it's a very Oklahoma City.
It's bougie. I mean, think
It's,
about it. You
it's
know, it's bougie. You know, them kids are going down there to be lawyers, MBAs. You
yep.
know, doctors. They're bougie. I mean, it's nice. I mean, football. We're surrounded by
That
football,
that
and we're probably the most dominant football team of all time. You know, if not us in Alabama. I mean, the deal is, you know, Oklahoma is bougie. It's very pretty. It's very nice. You know, and at the end of the day, they're about their sports. You know,
yeah
they are about their sports, and so Norman is a good town to live in. You know, and so, you got Stillwater. That's more of a, you know, cowboy laid back
yeah.
town. You
More
know,
country, more
yeah,
little
correct.
relaxed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so at the end of the day, still both pretty towns. It's just your preference of what you want. And so, I mean, up in Stillwater, you're gonna get the Wrangler boots and belts and hats, and down in Norman, you're gonna get the sweaters, and the shorts. So that's
The
just
the
yeah,
sweaters and the shorts is
yeah,
hilarious
yeah.
because
So that's
a
that's
lot of matcha teas. A lot
yeah,
of
yes. So yeah, it's just your preference.
So now you go into college, you run rush all through college, multiple championships, and from there you do what a lot of people do. All right, let me give the post collegiate amateur game a run.
Mhm.
It's worlds, it's here, it's there. When did it hit you? Because I think and speaking and watching people who I've known, there's almost not a, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to do this, not a thing of if something is achievable or if there's a goal that can be accomplished. But I think there's even like the conversation of the adult and grown. I think the realism of, all right, I was a college athlete, I was a good college athlete. I tried my hand in the professional and the amateur of achieving some things in my specific sport.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people get to a point where it's like, okay, how long can I do this?
Mhm.
And when do I pivot to it's time for a job or progression or whatever the next move is? Because I've seen it with partners of mine who've done, all right, man, let me try arena, let me go to Europe for
Mhm.
football, let me go over here. I've had friends who were like, I'm gonna play basketball in Mexico, and I'm like, lifestyle wise, like, when do you decide, all right, I'm gonna put this down and it's time to do the next thing in life? What's the next sport of life? What's the next challenge to accomplish?
Mhm.
When did you arrive at, okay, I'm time for me to get off of the mat, at least as a participant, as an athlete? And what made you click and say, naturally, man, I have all this skill set, I have it in me, you know, from even that Eastside Warrior beginning. I think I could do this for other young men like me.
I wrestled during the Great Depression of wrestling, from '05. I mean, the '04. I say after the Olympics in '04 to the Olympics
That
in
brother said
12.
the Great Depression of
Yeah, it,
wrestling.
it was, I mean, wrestling was so thrown off that they were thinking about banning it from the Olympics. They're like,
Yep.
this ain't wrestling, and, the rules that we have now, those are the rules I wish we had, because that was the rules I wish that's the rules we knew growing up. And so, the at the end of the day, you never knew how that will go. But once you start wrestling now and it's your true lifestyle, you know, I'm all now. You start just thinking about money. You ain't even really thinking about, you know, much as you're training. How can I get money? And when your eyes is focused on money and not the, the what you're there for, you're gonna get blindsided. Like, who can give me the most money? Now, I applaud Kel Sanderson, because in '09, when he took the job, he asked me to be on board with him. And he says, I don't want you to focus on your rent, your bills. They're going to be taken care of. I need you to come out here and focus on yourself and help others, which helps me. And I said, good. That's all I need. And so, and that's where I saw my success. And so, but still during that Great Depression of wrestling, you know, yeah, I was losing myself because wrestling, it was who I was. It wasn't something I did. And that's, when I allow that to be my leading factor, you miss out on why you're doing it. Because if it don't go your way, you feel worthless. You feel like, why am I here? I feel
Exactly.
disgraceful. And so, my goal was always to be Olympic champ, and the deal is, I was, that was that was what I was seeing in 2012, and I fell short. And the deal is I was disgusted with myself. I really was. And so,
Mm,
I had to step away. I stepped away for a year and said, no, I got to learn myself because this is becoming who I am, and I'm not going nowhere, man. I'm feeling worthless,
mm.
even though many will see I'm very been successful in this game. And so, at the end of the day, we don't all we see is the outcome. When you see people like, man, why would they do that to themselves? Man, they were on top of the world, you know, and that
Mm.
could be probably the main reason why they did, because that's all they know.
Yeah,
That's their God, and that's what it was. My wrestling, my achievements, my accolades, myself was becoming my God, and
that's deep.
that's what people knew me as. They knew me as the wrestler. When you heard my name, which is a very rare name, you thought the wrestler. And
Wrestler.
when people still say it, they're like, Teyon, yeah, Teyon, the wrestler. And I'm like, yeah, that's just what it is, because that's what I've
Mm.
established myself as. And so that's where God had to take me. He said, nah, you're making that above me. And I told you
Yeah.
I'm jealous. I
Can't
told you I'm
can't
a
can't
jealous man.
yeah,
He says, I'm a
can't
jealous guy.
can't have
And
that. We read the story of the
he
Tower of
he
Babel.
had to give me
It
some
don't go
refine.
well. Read the story of the Tower of Babel. It
Yeah,
don't go well.
right, it doesn't. And the deal is, God was saying, look, man, I see how you're doing. I ain't even allowed you to be in the Olympic champions. This is how you
Mm.
live. Just think, if I give you the world, what worse you're going to be. And so the deal is God had to show me how lukewarm I was. And he said,
Mm.
son, I'm about to spit you out. and
Mm.
that was the key when I recognized that in 2012, 2013. I was like, yeah, it's okay. I can let this go. And I can
Mm.
go and show young men, you know, things to avoid. All I can do is plant that seed. This is not the route you want to go. Yeah, you can be successful, but you know, wrestling is something you do. It shouldn't be who you are.
Mm.
And you're gonna have bigger opponents. You're gonna have tougher opponents than this. I can assure you, because this is this is not a street fight. There's still rules in this. You're gonna go against
Right.
enemies that you're gonna have to street fight, that have no rules. They can hit you whenever,
Mm.
however, wherever, and everything like that. And so, and that's what God has been showing me. It's like, no, I'm trying to prepare you to be prepared for the real enemy. And a lot of time, my biggest enemy is when I look in that mirror, and that's myself.
Right, man.
That's my flesh. That's my need to want to be entertained and everything. And so he's showing me,
Mm.
you know, you're your biggest enemy, and you won't win. Because you lack that discipline. You lack, you're trying to go off your own will. And I've shown you in my Bible the men that went off their own will, how many times they failed. And I'm like,
Mm.
you're right, and so at the end of the day, that's what he's showing me, and that's why I believe he's giving me this assignment to show young men, hey, you know, there's a big this ain't a life or death situation. This is
Right.
what you're choosing to do. Don't compare this that you're going out to a real battle. No, a real battle is a guy putting his life on the line and don't know if
Right.
he's gonna come home. So that's a real battle. This is just a 7-minute battle of, you know, trying to help your pride. And so that's what he's showing, what we truly, when I'm truly battling and showing these guys that.
Yeah, I love it, man. Realizing that, this wasn't your whole identity couldn't be
Hmm.
found in you and what you created, man. That's
Hmm.
that's powerful, man. That woo, it's like, man, I
Hmm.
made myself my own idol. Like it's me. And then yeah,
Hmm.
like I said, Tower of Babel. Yeah, no, man, can't have this.
Hmm. Oh
Can't
yeah.
have that.
No, you're right. You're
Man.
exactly right.
So and we talked even before, man. So now you're in there helping and aiding with lives, and like off the top of my head, because again, I think, I think of an Ed Ruth, I think of yourself, I think of a Jordan Burroughs, a Gable Stevenson, but I mean, I think I think of Kevin Randall, because I also watched
Hmm.
MMA.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think of, in my opinion, folk, I think of, the black guy, I think of Kenny Monday. Like I think
Hmm.
of all these names, and I say all of those names, and they all have one thing, well, multiple things in common, but one thing really stands out. And these are all brothers who've been very successful on the mat, have been able to achieve things collegiately, Olympic level. Like I said, Coach Monday got what, four of them things. Like, yeah, he was the guy.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
you being from Oklahoma, and even those names that I've mentioned, we talked about a little before. How do you even begin to understand, like, to get like the dearth of young black talent that kind of skips over wrestling or forgets it or doesn't look at it as an option? How do you